everybody, and welcome back to fedibull.com. And today I am going to, discuss cinematography, and I'm trying to create a tutorial for you. By the way, this scene file and this cinematography tutorial is really with hands-on. So that means that scene file you can download to your computer right now and experience it by yourself. Not just experience by yourself, but do it yourself. And you can use the cinematic camera I was setting up, the sequencer, and you can test it in real time, because as you know, I use the free software from Epic Games. It's Unreal, and you can actually use this software as a digital playground, so to speak, as a digital mock-up place to simulate cinematography shots. And of course you can do the ray tracing, the rendering, and the shading and the animation here in this software and in that tool. So I jump straight into that, and of course I would like to say two things at the beginning. That cinematography has actually two chapters. One is the shading and the lighting, the look development, so to speak. The lighting is very, very important, with colors and color palettes, etc. And I also will create one after this one here for you. And the core point, of course, in cinematography is understanding the camera work. And this is what I'm jumping in right now, right here. So as you can see in this scene file right now, this is my editor view. And when I switch here from perspective to my camera, you can clearly see that things are already changing, and that clearly has to do with the camera settings, because you can change the exposure, you can change the lens, the film gate, chromatic aberration, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of stuff you can do to make this shot look much more, cinematic. And this demo scene file, by the way, you can download for free on my website, fedibull.com. It's under my resource section. And I think that's great if you can use that scene file and those are my cameras and see everything, how I was setting it up. Also in the editor, you can clearly see I set up here also lens flares, everything in real time. So you can really check everything and see what is going on. And what you also can see here is in this particular shot, if I'm zooming or going further to that car here, the cop car, you can clearly see here that I started already a sequencer, and I just basically created under cinematic a sign camera act. It's called Bernhard's cinematic demo camera. So this is nothing else than the camera itself. And I would say let's jump straight into how I was setting up that cinematic shots and how I usually use cinematography and my lenses and cameras in real time. And I go through everything step by step. And I wanted to do this video tutorial for cinematography because I feel there are so many tutorials out there where people talk about it in theory, but you cannot put yourself like I don't know, like you can't play by yourself. You can't actually execute by yourself. You can't take a camera and run some tests. And I think having this demo scene file and this digital software and this digital mock-up place where you can play, this is fantastic, because you can simulate lighting and shading, and you can create levels and moods and whatever you like. And I mean, there is no way you could do this in reality, right? Unless you have a lot of friends or a lot of money to build all those assets and, do everything in reality. So that being said, I would say let's jump straight into that scene file. First of all, as you can see, once you downloaded that scene file, I really recommend download it. You will see that it's basically like a stage, a level, and how it is in for film and cinematography and all this kind of like stages. It's all a fake. It's kind of like a stage where you want to tell a story and where you build up your shots, and you start building the lighting and set cameras and go with it as you think like, yeah, this is going to be a good fit. In that particular case, what I like about it, by the way, also I wanted to say big thank you to, I forgot his name, but there is a guy, the link is in my video download description. I think it's Level Designer or something like this, who provided that level here for free as well. Super cool, so thank you so much that we can use this here for testing. But I wanted to say, like, once you downloaded it, let's jump into the camera and let's get now to the most important things, and that is the camera. Okay, so I'm not going into the asset creation and how we do materials and shading and lighting in this tutorial. That comes next, but in this one it's all about the camera and doing some cinematic stuff. Whoa, let's check out that guy here, right? So I put a few characters in it. Here, change here my camera, and then you can also see how the character looks. And there is another one I used in the opening sequence. So let's get started. What is the first thing? The first thing we want to look at is clearly the camera. And the camera is one of the most important things. So I select my camera and let's go through the settings here. As you can see on the left, I have the ability to change my manual focus, and I can also change, of course, my lens. So I can, go like with the focal length of 5mm, or zoom in and have here like a 300mm lens, and then I can zoom back, and everything goes in real time. That's this beautiful thing. And because maybe before I go even deeper in that, because people ask me, is it really real time, Bernhard? Is it really? And I say, yes, look at this frames per second. I have here like even fully retraced everything, so to speak, 35 frames per second. I'm using an RTX 2080 NVIDIA card. And that just gives me all the power I need as a start. It's really, really cool. Render time is super fast, so it gives you a lot of power. So, and the next thing I wanted to show you that it's really real time as a test, that you are absolutely convinced that this is not a cheat, that you feel like, oh, this is not going to work. So if you press the G button, you see all the different actors here. You see different cameras, and you see also lights. And you see here above that character, I position the light, right? And maybe also I check out here my camera. You see the color grading is different. It's much more blue. But what I wanted to show you is like here the light. If you change the light from blue, for instance, to green or yellow, you can see I can do my lighting in real time, and I can totally influence the look. That's the key light of my character here, how this guy looks like, right? So that's what I wanted to show you. And now I'm going back here to my camera and let's get started. So I press the G button, and now let's focus on our Bernhard's cinematic camera. All right. So as you can see, my camera is movable. That's the first thing, of course. That is absolutely clear because I also create animations. And the next thing I wanted to show you is that you have presets where you can use a film gate 16:9, and you also can use here a full frame DSLR. And lots of people also ask me, like, what's the difference between a full frame and not a full frame? So for instance, if you're using a Canon a Nikon camera and you don't have a full frame camera, then you have a so-called crop factor on your camera from the body. And that means that crop factor multiplies. If you put on like a 50mm lens and you have a specific crop factor, then the 50mm lens turns, it's not a 50mm lens anymore, it turns into a different one because you need to multiply with the crop factor. But anyways, I don't want to go too technical about it. What I prefer, as you can clearly see here, the Filmback and the film pixel aspect ratio. For this particular case, I really like to shoot with the crazy, Filmback, and I go here, so to speak, with a very wide shot. And as you can see, I'm using 50 mil to 20 mil film sensor, okay? And that is not the lens, it's the film sensor. So you get the film aspect ratio. So this is the first thing what I do. And you can clearly see this impact because now I get super wide, you know, like the width is great. And I don't know, I just like it. It's really cinematic, makes it really look cool, right? So, and now let's go through the next one, the next settings. What you can see here is that I can choose that my lens, so to speak, can start from 4 mil and goes up to 1000 mil. But to be quite frankly here, you know, if you go down to 1 mil and have a 1000 mil in the focal length, that's kind of crazy anyways. Because, I mean, check this out. If you change now the current focal length, I have now a 60 mil on it, okay? And if you choose now, for instance, here a 20 mil, okay, that you can see the difference. Look what a wide angle lens that is, and everything gets much sharper. If you go like, for instance, with a 10 mil, the distortion starts to be really, really crazy. I mean, look how strong this distortion is and how crazy the distortion is on the car here, right? So that's something that is, in my opinion, too extreme. And I usually say that a 35 mil to a 40 mil, 50 mil looks pretty cool, but it honestly, it depends really absolutely on the shot. It depends on if you're in outside, if it's an interior shot, and how you frame your shot. This is it's all artwork, you know. This is actually, I think, what makes a real DP, a director of photography, so special, because there is no rule. I mean, there is nothing that is right or wrong. It's just basically that you pick something that looks cool. But I want to show you what I usually pick and what I do to get a nice depth of field and to create nice bokeh effects in the background. So things are really blurring out when you play here with the so-called manual focus distance, okay? So first comes first, let me explain this. When you use, for instance, the f-stop or the aperture, like here, very, very low, then the iris is wide open of the lens, okay? That means when the number is lower, like at 1, the iris of the lens gets bigger and larger and more light is bouncing through the lens, okay? So this is a key fundamental knowledge about photography. So as you can see here, when you go lower with the f number and it stops at 1, right? Because we set it at 1 as a 1 mil, then you can clearly see that the exposure goes up. And if I close now this iris, it is totally underexposed because my ISO, the film sensitivity, is not adjusted, okay? So now look at this. In a real camera, if you have, for instance, shooting with a 24 mil, with an Aperture and f-stop of 24, it's pretty tiny and everything gets pretty sharp. Now we have an issue here because, as you can see, it's underexposed. And in the digital world, there is a trick. What I usually use here, you can assign to the sign camera actors the post process. And you have here, instead that you also choose like the ISO, you can change the ISO and everything, but you have here the lens exposure and you have a so-called exposure compensation. So that exposure compensation is actually a cheat that doesn't exist in a real physical camera, but it makes your life a little bit easier and faster. I see it like the ISO, you know, the film sensitivity, because I can crank this up here and can lower it and have it basically, you know, can control it like that in a very simple way with the most important ingredients of my camera. So that's the f-stop. And as you can see, because I also limited my f-stop here, max, for instance, to 22, I can do this and set it up to 32. And I go with my minimum, maybe to 0.5. But so you can see now, if you scrub through, right, it kind of stops at 32 because this was like, so to speak, our minimum. We can go here to 100 and see if it goes even darker. Now you can see the exposure goes even down because the camera setting is not limited anymore. But it is also clearly to see that if you're shooting here with 50 in an f-stop, which would be in reality on a physical camera 24 f and above, and you also change the exposure and make sure that it's not underexposed or overexposed, then you can clearly see everything is sharp and stays sharp. And this is physically completely accurate because that means the iris is so small that you don't get any depth of field anymore. You just don't. Even if you're shooting here with a 68mm lens. So it doesn't matter. Even if I go like with a wide angle, or even if I would go with the, we call it in Europe teleobjective, right? But 120mm lens and everything is still sharp, even in the background. And the reason why is pretty clear is because you are shooting right now with an f-stop or an aperture from 50. That is insane, right? So in the film world, in cinematography, I call it, film directors, and what makes shots look much, much better is I call it they shoot wide open. And people ask me, what are you talking about shooting wide open? And that basically doesn't mean anything else that they choose an iris that is wide open, that is like the biggest hole you can get, so to speak, when you look, if you would look through the lens, right? And I show you how this is now in a practical way. You can test this by yourself. And it's so cool that you can test this on the computer in Unreal because, you don't need an actual physical camera. You don't need to spend all this crazy expensive money, and you can train your eye and you can train cinematography in a digital way on in the scene file and with your computer. But look at this. So watch that. So we are going and changing the aperture, the f-stop. So what happens? Again, let's repeat it. If you lower the aperture, the iris, the hole, gets bigger and bigger and more light is bouncing through. Look at this. It's totally overexposed then, right? So it's totally overexposed. Now, if you're shooting more wide open, more light is bouncing through. That means you need to adjust the exposure compensation, right? So you bring down the film sensitivity or ISO or the compensation, and you keep going. And you basically keep going and you say like, okay, I go down and I go more down and I go more down. And now you see that if you change this and you adjust also the exposure, you see this in real time. Look at the background, how blurry it gets, and where it starts to get blurry. And you see also the nice bokeh effects, and then you can adjust the camera settings to the lighting environment, and you can basically find something, a camera where you feel like, dude, this looks super cool, this looks cinematic, right? So from the framing, what I also like always to frame, but that's just the personal preferences. For instance, if I have here a character, right? And I want to set that guy into the focus, then I make sure that I pick a lens that it's not too crazy blurry and my exposure is balanced. And I get something that, looks kind of like that. So, you see? And then you can play with the exposure. Now we have this guy in focus as well. And even funny that the cop car, right? Even the lights are blinking on and off. But so this is the first thing. And now this is the most important thing also to understand the camera operation. And basically any professional camera works the same. It has the same physics, right? So there is no other thing than this. Of course, a film camera doesn't have, for instance, like a shutter speed in seconds where you have like shutter opens and closes. And on the computer, of course, that goes automatically because the picture is retraced and rendered in real time, so you don't actually have that. And a film camera has actually a disc, has a blade inside. That's a little different than a DSLR camera. But for this tutorial, I don't want to go too technical. It's much more about that you should enjoy testing and experimenting with the camera settings. What you get, that you get a much better feeling and feel about it. But what I also wanted to show you is the blade count. Yes. So when you look at that bokeh shape, okay, then you can clearly see that it has 4 edges. And that is changed by the blade count. As you can see here, I like 5. And then you can clearly see that the bokeh effect is changing to 5, okay? So you can clearly see it, for instance, here on this one. And I really like that. I mean, this is awesome. So for instance, if you have 7, 12 or whatever, then it's round. It's basically the shape when you look through the iris of your lens, right? How many blades you actually have, and that forms and shapes that specific form. So, and what I really like is if you have 5, and then you get the sharp edges. I really like that. That adds this extra. It pimps the shot, in my opinion. I just like it. And the good news is also that you could actually exchange the bokeh shape to anything you would like by loading just a texture map, a bokeh shape in here into your camera, into the lens settings. And you could also influence then the bokeh size when you look through a direct light source. Then you will see it in the flare, okay? And I'll show you that as well in the next step. So, but before we go to the next step in the bokeh and also the flare settings, I want to go through the camera settings here. What do you see? First of all, the camera setting is set to manual. That is very important because if you set it to none, then everything is sharp, as you can see. And also, if it's set to none, you know, you cannot control then actually the f-stop. There is nothing you can see that has no effects because the focus mode is just set to none, and you don't want to do that. You want to set it to manual because a real director of photography and somebody who understands photography doesn't want to shoot anything literally on auto, you know. So you want to control everything. You want to understand the basics, and you want to, you know, set everything up so that, you know, you have full control and you can learn it. By the way, one cool thing is here, a feature is a help to set the focus, is you can click here the picker, and then let's say I want to set the focus in the background to the car. Look, that's beautiful. Now I select the face. Now it's my character in focus. I set the focus to the building in the background, and it's in focus. And you can also see how the bokeh effect then is jumping. You can see it here on the lights, right? Because, of course, now my background is in focus. And you can also see how the manual focus distance is immediately shifting and changing. Because if I click my guy in the foreground, now it's a distance from the focal settings 195. So that's probably, I mean, it's units in here, maybe 2 meters. It's the camera away. But you can see you have here all these options and you can change everything. And when you look at that, just like that is, I mean, this is really freaking cool what Unreal did here. It's like, I don't know, I just love it because you can test so many things. You can make product shots, you can make cinematic shots, you can play with lighting and color grading and everything. So this is how you set the focus. There is also, if you haven't seen that here, the draw debug focus plane. That basically means that when you look through your camera, you can see when you push forward or backwards, where is your focus point, where is your plane. And when this plane indicates like, look, this guy is not pushing through, right? So he is now on the level where he is in focus, okay? And if you change that, and you can see if I push it further back, then you can see it disappears. It goes through the car, and then of course also the main character is out of focus, okay, and he gets blurry. So if you're having any difficult time to set the focus, then you can clearly use the draw debug focus plane if you want to. You can also change the color here, of course, but you know, I barely use it because I can see very clearly here. I have a huge screen and the resolution is amazing, and I have almost 40 frames per second. Everything runs like fluent. So I use it like manually here, and I have my glasses on, so I see actually things very, very sharp. But again, those are helpful tools here, and that's really, really cool from Epic that they actually put that all in. Then as you can see, the current aperture or f-stop is exactly the same here what you have in the actor, in the sequencer. And you can bring all those values over to the animation tab or into the sequencer, which I usually prefer. So, and I basically assign those values here on the left side because I want to animate them as well. I might want to change them when an animation is going on, and I don't like to go here in all the details of my camera. Okay, so I take out or grab the most important key features and bring it over here in my sequencer. Okay, so because we have here the most important features anyways over on the left, let's have a look what else we have here. Camera options. I don't play here anything with the pawn camera options. I leave everything like it is. The static mesh you could change of the camera. That's how the camera appears here in the sequencer, so to speak. And then what else we have? We have the lens in the post process. And there are lots and lots and lots of features. Now, one feature I want to discuss immediately is the so-called bloom. Okay, so as you can see, I can change the bloom from standard to convolution. I usually use the standard bloom, and once this is activated, you can see that you can also change the intensity. Look at this. If I pump this up to 8 or 80, look at this. This is bloomy as it gets. I mean, like, this is so bloomy. I can bring now down the exposure, and the bloom is everywhere. This is almost like a fog, right? Look at this. And I also have to say that that camera and what Epic did here with all those camera settings, it's kind of really super nice, because look at that. The question is, when do you use a super strong bloom? Maybe in this particular case, this is maybe more like a Silent Hill horror scenario game, you know, where like you have zombies at night. It washes it out. It washes it out, and it creates this bloom effect on highlights and specular glossy reflections, right? And it's not really clear. It makes the shot very, very soft when you use bloom. And the bloom was usually a filter in cinematography where, you know, the actor's face was like softened and washed out. I have not seen it these days anymore in modern movies as strong or as much, because if you do that, it can wash out a lot of details and makes the whole movie or film maybe a little bit like dreamy, right? As you can see, it's almost like foggy, like you have been I don't know, taking too much LSD, or you're on a cyberpunk trip, or you have been taking just the organic white powder called cocaine a little bit too much. But anyways, as you can see, whatever it is, you can change this and you can reduce the intensity of your bloom LSD effect and adjust this. And when you do that, you also have to adjust the exposure compensation. And when I change my bloom to 0, then you can also see that it's getting very clear. And that question came up a lot because, for instance, if you are not, for instance, shooting a cinematic shot like this one, and let's say you need to shoot a very crisp and clean product shot, then you might not want to use any bloom effect at all, because if it's a high-end magazine shot for any high-end product, usually, you know, agencies require to deliver something that looks very, very clean and clear and crisp, and so you don't want to assign that here at all. But if you add a little bit bloom, you can clearly see it on the highlights and you know, on these little lights, what the character has on, that it really helps to create this bloom effect. So I usually leave it on for a little bit because I like it when I see the self-illumination on lights like this and it's bloomy, and it helps a little bit. But I don't do it too intense, just subtle, so it kind of like feels all right and feels good. Okay, so this is the first thing. As you can see, there is also a threshold, and the threshold is very, very important. It basically means how much you want to compress the bloom effect, okay, at a specific point or location. And this is clearly to see, where do we have a light, but here the main character, it's also it's really good to see, for instance, here at these tiny little spotlights, because when you increase the threshold, you can see the fall off is stronger in this regards, and if you reduce it, then you see it's much more diffuse and broad, and the bloom effect is bigger and larger and is going to be applied on a larger scale volume. So this is really up to you how you want to do that. I prefer to have a little threshold in here. It's for sure shot and scene dependent, whatever you feel looks the best. And you can also see, this is really cool, then I'll show you in post-production as well. Once you did a lighting, and you have been setting up the lighting somehow primarily, this is not just the Previz and layout tool anymore for me. I mean, I'm so stoked and happy about this, because in color grading and in real-time post-production here, you can actually color grade this. It's wonderful and can change this so much. Also here, then I show you, you can do gamma controls. Questions came up with linear workflow, non-linear workflow. I mean, this is not even a question then anymore, because you can adjust the gamma curves in real time. You can bump up the blacks or the darks, and you can also change the highlights and the midtones. It's just insane. So it's really, really cool. Well, then I would say let's keep going here. There is, of course, exposure. We have been talking about this. I don't change anything here. There will be also advanced tabs in the exposure, but otherwise everything will take too long here. I want to push this through here that you don't fall asleep. But it's super cool, and I hope you will not fall asleep because it's really, really super cool. So chromatic aberration. So as you can see, if you want to assign a chromatic aberration, then you can do this. You see this on film, of course. You see it also on TV and television. And when you get closer, you can clearly see if I bump this up, you know, and it's also in real time, then you can clearly see how it's changing the edges here, right, in those rainbow colors. If I zoom out, you see it super strong here. It's almost like a stereoscopic effect already here. And I also have seen in post-production lots of people then assigning this chromatic aberration like crazy, so that again you're on the next LSD trip. Right? That reminds me always like, oh shit, I was having too much fun last night, or you know, I don't know what happened then with me, but something like that. And you know, it's a style for sure. And if you want to, you know, go extreme in a way, then go ahead. If you like it, it's artwork, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong or right. It's all preference. And But what I wanted to show you is like that you can control the intensity here. And my preference is clear that I just want to have those edges subtle. Okay, so I don't overdo it, just subtle. So it gives me, again, this super nice cinematic look. I mean, look at that, just this shot here, right now. This is epic, right? Just alone the color grading, what we have, a little bit underexposed, and then we can, you know, brighten it up. But look, also the focus is cool on this shot. The focus is on the head, you know, clearly to see. And we can clearly see the materials and the scratches, maybe a little bit underexposed, as I said, and then we can, you know, pimp the shot and make sure that we have all the values and the levels in this shot. And even so, if we're not jumping into lighting, which we could assign here another, you know, lighting on this side, on the left side, that we highlight that shape, form, and definition, that you get a highlight here on the left side. We can still do something here in the level correction, and I'll show you this as well. What else? Well, there is a dirt mask intensity, so that means you can load a dirt texture map, and it's going to be assigned on top of it, and then you would see here everywhere the dirt. I don't have one here right now provided for you, but that's very simple and easy to assign. Then here again, this is something, of course, I did not go through with you those settings. Because if you activate now, let's say if you would have a true physical camera and that would be a DSLR camera, then you have a so-called shutter speed. And if you change that shutter speed, as you can clearly see, you change, of course, also the exposure, right? And I told you before that you can control shutter speed and ISO independently. And you can totally do that because it also has an influence to the motion blur, right? But I didn't want to go in this particular case into the details about the correlation from the shutter speed and the ISO because it would take too long. I create then another one and also show you how you can control that. But in this particular case, I basically say instead of using shutter speed and ISO, okay, it's totally okay if you leave this all unchecked and just go with the exposure compensation for the beginning so that you have minimum you know, efforts to control everything and to get the maximum results as quick as possible. So dirt mask cameras, this is what I, in the camera setting, what I just said. So we keep this for later. And now you see also what I have been setting up is the so-called lens flare. Okay, and people also said to me like, well, I don't get it. Now in lens flare we have again bokeh and a threshold, and then we can also change the bokeh. What's now the big difference? First of all, let me set here key. Okay, so as you can see on the transform and all the other settings, I set the key and then I go forward maybe like to frame 15. And now let's have a look when I move over here to the bokeh effect. In the lens flare. As you can see, when I move my camera, I have to crank up the intensity here so that you can clearly see it. Then you see now those 5 bladed shapes. Very clear to see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Holy shit, it's actually 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 edges. Whatever. So you get this form if you type in 5 blades, you get this 6 edges, of course, because we have 5 blades. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, it's again 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 blades. That's kind of funky. Anyways, but when you use, so as you can see, when you use now the lens flare and you turn it on and off, then this is the lens flare that is created from a direct light source that is going straight through your lens, through your iris of your camera. Okay. And in this particular case, it's the light from the cop car in the background, right? And you see how intense that is. So if you would have a real physical camera right now and you would do that, you would hold your lens shooting wide open and you would hold it through a strong visible light source, you would get that lens flare. But the cool thing is that you can control the intensity. as you can see, I can reduce it, I can completely remove it, or I can, in real time, boost it so that it's super strong. So again, I try to mimic a real physical camera and bring it to a value where I can see it. And then you have also the size. If I make it too small, the edges, they look like not nice. That's why I make the size also like so that it feels like it fits to a real camera. And then you have here a threshold, but this threshold actually, in this particular case, is just really acting to the angles, I believe. I never really use here the threshold. You see a little bit here, minor change from the threshold overall from 3201 in the bokeh effect. Minor to see, okay? So this is really then up to you. But I go like large and it makes this, the iris in the middle a little bit stronger. So if I go now back to my camera, and as you can see, this is already animation. Super cool. So you can do here very simple and very quick, nice animation. But I show you this later on. So lens flare set. Image effects, that's for sure what I use is vignetting. So that means if you turn on the vignetting, very clear to see. Intensity 1, the edges are getting darker and black, or like you brighten it up, and very clear vignetting, okay, effect. So I add a little bit. The grain is the film noise, so you can of course assign that, and then you can say like, okay, you crank it up to 1, look how grainy it gets now, okay, and you see it, the film noise, so to speak, in real time. And you know, I personally have to say that in the past, lots of people, also in the movie industry, we always tried to add the film grain and match CGI shots if we had to integrate it to a film, of course, right? And that was very clear. Today, I would say if you're shooting just everything digital and you don't get a film grain or like a digital camera created noise, of course, if you want to integrate it, match it. But if everything is shot in CGI, so with computer generated images, and you don't even use live action footage, you don't even use real film footage, then yeah, I mean, I think it's a preference again. Then it's really up to you if you want to add this film noise or if you don't, if you want to keep it clean. I prefer to actually keep it super clean or super, super subtle, okay? So like this one. Then depth of field, pretty clear. We spoke about depth of field and the correlation between the aperture, the f-stop. So that's the radius of the iris, okay? Larger, enlarged or smaller, to the focal length. Okay, so this is what we discussed already. Then color grading is really, really crazy. First of all, look at this. I can do immediately white balance. And I mean, just watch that. If I go now into a cool shot, I can make this whole thing like super cold and cool. And I can even warm it up like what I had before. And that's basically white balance, you know. And I wanted to stay more to the real colors, whoever was shading and texturing it, but like something like this around 9600. And yeah, I would say that was really, really nice. And you can also see you can tint it into other hue shifts, more into the purple one, okay, or more into the greenish one, but I basically don't do that here. And then let's get started. It's so powerful. I mean, it's insane because now on the global color grading settings, you have, first of all, saturation. And it's really insane because you have the RGB values and you can also select HSV. But I mean, you can literally control all those major colors. I mean, just look at that. That's just like in my saturation, if I go into my reds, I'm shifting them and I change that. And what you can see here, for instance, this is also kind of like a cinematography trick. is what I usually tend to do is I want to keep the color palettes similar or identical. So when you look at this, for instance, here right now, and I push my saturation into this direction, you see that my red and my blues, everything is shifting very subtle into that direction in two-stream color palette. And that's the intensity. So as you can see, I can go from black and white to super high saturated, color grading values. And I, try to keep it subtle here as well. But if I stay at 1, that's kind of like cool. And if I want to do it more like cyberpunk style, then maybe you want to pump up the colors here. But that depends then really on the creative direction and on the director, and art direction, of course, what specific style you prefer. So now next thing, after saturation, let's go through here. By the way, I saved the scene file for you that you have that specific demo what we are going through here right now. You can download, you can open, and you have the exact same settings. You can see it in real life, and then you can create your own cameras, right? That's the fun. So now watch this contrast. Look, that's basically also my gamma. So I can literally inverse my gamma. This would be non-linear, or I stay at 1, totally linear. And in old retracers, in the offline retracers, there was always this crazy fight about we need to work in a linear workflow for compositing purpose, because if we don't work linear, we can't we cannot compose or use the compositing software tools to bring it back to the RGB beauty. So whatever. At the end, everything is artwork, and you have to, just understand what you do and what specific look you would like to have. And in my opinion, you always have to look that you get, a beautiful shot in terms of lighting, shading, and that you get all the values out of it, the levels and the values. That's the key. Okay, no matter anymore if this is 32-bit, 16-bit, 8-bit, because at the end, once you have a final image and you bring it to the screen, it's literally all 8-bit, right? But compositing would give you more powerful tools in 32-bit, but because this is real time, you don't need to worry about that. It's all what you need to worry is about how does my final shot look like here on the screen? And that's the cool stuff, right? So if this was set up, and now look, because if you change this, and you change also the gamma, right? You see that the blacks and the darks, you can lift them, right? But of course, if you do it too much, you wash it out, but it gives you some room and you can make some adjustments. But this is just one wheel here, right? The contrast. Then I have to say, sorry, this was contrast. They also built for you the gamma control, right? So this was my bad now, but as you can see, it looks similar here, and you can go in and you can change also here the gamma. So lift this a little bit that you can see it. Then gain. So that basically is again like, do you brighten it up a little bit, the gain from the exposure, and you can also then shift the whole gain into one specific color form. Like if I push this more over here into my reds, and you see it for sure what's happening here. You have also offset values in red and in green and in blue. So this is very powerful in the gain, I have to say so, because that is nothing else if you're using After Effects or if you would use Nuke or Fusion or whatever compositing tool you have been familiar in the past using, right? This is nothing else than Colorista or like color grading, where you can move and shift, so to speak, the reds and the blues and whatever. And that is a trick for cinematography. What I usually did a lot to really mix colors and mix them more together in how do you say, like you mix those color palettes together that you have more a monochromatic look. Okay, that's all about coloring, color grading. Okay, so when you look at this, I kind of like that. I also kind of like that. This is more like a red. I pushed here the red, as you can see, slightly, and you have to be very, very subtle or very, very gentle when you do this to get specific look what you're actually aiming for, right? And then at the end, again, you can immediately, turn it on, turn it off, and see what impact it has, and if you're kind of like happy with this or if you're not happy. But I have to say, with the little offset, I'm okay here, and bring it more into a warmer touch. And you can see the warm lights in the background. That orange light is closer, gets closer to the golden brownish orange look of the metal of this character. And when you look also this bluish kind of look in the background now fits more to the bluish kind of look from the face, whatever that, or mask, whatever that is. And so you basically have a more monochromatic color palette, and that makes it also look more cinematic. Okay, so what is the next thing? Shadows. Yeah, I mean, as you can see, I can just control now my shadows, and I can just go in and say, like, I want to color correct my shadows. I want to change then the contrast or the gamma of my shadows, as you can see, and it's just the shadows. Okay, it's really, really very powerful. You can make it like, you see how you can crunch them, the blacks, right? And this is what I meant, because you can go in here when the gain or the gamma is washing it out. Then you could literally go in just, for instance, into the shadows and bring them up, okay? And not just the entire thing in the level correction. So whatever you prefer then, and whatever you see and whatever you like. So the same in the shadows, you have gain, and you have an offset, and you can even change just in color grade the shadows. And the cool stuff is you have the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights. Okay. So when I go here in my midtones, and let's see what we can do, then you can, always work a little bit on those numbers and see what is it actually doing to your shot. Okay, is it washing it out? Is it too extreme? Is it too intense? And I mean, the cool stuff is just because it's in real time, you don't need to render anything. You don't need to wait for having different, compositing nodes until you actually see something, and it always has to run through your render and so on. You can see here the color correction is done. I have my animation in real time. If I do this, boom, I can see the whole thing in real time, and that is so much fun and so much more powerful, because I can do, like I said before, not just previz and layout and my cinematic approach and my camera in real time. I can also do the color grading and the lighting. So that's why I love it so much, and I will never ever go back anymore, because real time ray tracing is now happening, and it's the future. I'm telling you that. No matter if you're in film or like for product shots, games, levels, it really doesn't matter. So that being said, what else? I showed you midtone, shadows, and highlights. That is really color grading, and that is very important, because you want to make sure that you have in the color grading, of course, something picked that looks really, really photoreal. So when you look at this, I would say those are the basics. Okay, I don't touch anything anymore on this, and you can see it looks pretty cool. But maybe as a final touch, what I wanted to show you also in real time is that yes, you can add, for instance, additional lights. And that specific light now, what I was adding, is point light number 16, is like literally killing it right now. So I basically jump out of here and look where this light is positioned. As you can see, it's here right next to the character, okay? So, and when I jump back into this, I basically make this a movable light. Now you see it here. This is this light here. And let's pump it up a little bit, you know, and let's make it 0.1. And all I do, when you can see this, I can position my light in real time. I get also a bokeh effect on it. But the fact is, I can now shift that light anywhere I want to, just to make sure I get a nice rim light on his head. And I can change the source radius, so that gives me softer shadows and larger shadows. Like if it's 0, it's a sharp shadow, but if you change the source radius, it gets a larger shadow. And like I said, I don't want to go into specifics into lighting, because lighting is such a big chapter. Okay, there are multiple different lights. You need to know how you can influence a shot with lighting scenarios, and how you light something, key lights and you know, bounce lights and everything to get the specific look and feel you want to achieve. And then of course for the retracing, there's a lot to say, a lot to say, because not every light will be fully retraced for GI, for global illumination, and so on. So there's a lot of stuff going on. But as you can see, if this light wouldn't be on, right, then you can see that the head, the shape and shoulder form definition is getting lost a little bit in the background. And if I add this specular highlight and make sure that this light is kind of like illuminating his, as a rim light, also here his back head and the shoulder, and I just used here, like, for instance, blue or red or orange, just so you can see this light very, very clearly, right? Then this helps to pronounce this character even more, because you lift this character a little bit more in front, you know, into the focus, and it's helping to detach it, so to speak, from the background. The cool stuff about real-time lighting and also working with directors on the set, especially if you do then real-time photo shoot or live action footage integration real-time, is that you can work with the director on the set in real time, and you can actually show immediate results. You can move here the lights, and you know, the vision of the director and even the creative director and the art director is very, very important. And if you want to visualize that and help him, I mean, this is a great tool to do it. So as you can see, and I would adjust that light then accordingly, whatever would fit the best. But I think in this particular case, maybe a little light blue, so it fits to the color palette, but it gives this nice highlight, right? So, and as you can see, this is kind of pretty cool. And again, if you press G button and you save that scene file, you have here a cinematic shot that looks, I would say, out from a movie. Okay. So I had no influence on the modeling, and I didn't change any texture maps, because this is a free demo you can download. And also the character animation was here a little bit laggy or jaggy, and I'm sorry about that. I apologize for that, but it's not about the animation of the character. It's not a character animation. This is about cinematography. So what is next? Last but not least, before we close this chapter, is I just want to show you how to make a simple camera animation. And as you have seen already here, I created 150 frames in the sequencer. That's as a standard set. And now all I do is I go to frame 150 and I move my camera. And no matter where I move my camera, I can move it to the back, I can move it to the right. That's basically now the move you want to do with your shot or whatever you want to achieve. That's totally artwork and totally up to you. So wherever we are here right now, let's see, you can animate anything. So for instance, I set everything to allow key everything, okay, And if I change here my camera, as you can see, and all my keys are set, doesn't matter, boom, 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 boom. So then everything is kind of animated. And if my 120mm lens is a little crazy and I just want to change that, then you can see that, if you change this and you go down here to his, I don't know, to the concrete or whatever, you can see how this animation works. Now watch this. Boom. So we basically zoomed out, made the camera animation down, and now you have that. Boom. And that's in real time, right? That's kind of like really crazy. And if you want to change that, I mean, you just change the camera animation, and this is not really up to you. That's also artwork. And then as you can see, for instance, if the bokeh effect and everything is like, it's too extreme, and it kills my shot and also the chromatic aberration, then I usually go back and make all those proper adjustments, of course, like it is. But in this particular case, I just wanted to show you how to focus on one of these key shots and elements. And once you have this, then you set up a few more shots and you create your camera animation. But that's for the next step for sure, because using the camera animation and also using the graph editor, that's a key element here too, and understanding how you use that to make cool camera animation plus camera shakes and everything. This is for the next chapters. By the way, camera shake, if you haven't seen this video tutorial, I already explained it, how you can assign super easy and super nice to any of your cameras in the camera component a so-called camera shake through a blueprint. But that's in my other video, otherwise it's getting too long here. So I would say let's close this first chapter. I hope that was very helpful for you. I hope you have fun using that scene file, downloading and hearing all this explanation. But I think what is super cool, what I wanted to show you, is not just talking about cinematography. I just wanted to give you a tool, the cameras and all the lenses and this project file that you can actually do it. You can experiment. And I would say knock out your own shots, knock out your own cinematic shots, what I created here. You can do now the same. Render time is very fast. So if I do now really quick, okay, I'll just show you. If I just very end now, I do really for you just like this animation. And I go here. So like here, boom, or like to the bottom. And this is backwards or whatever, right? And then we change this here. So you can clearly see 150 frames. If I go like this from here to here and I render this out, it goes like super fast and super quick. And I show you live. So I render out an image sequence. So you click here on render this movie to a video, a JPEG sequence. Then I have been setting my resolution 2258 pixels in the width, and the height is 903 in this particular case. And then I just render out here live for you to, I don't know, shot number A, B, C, D, E, doesn't really matter. So select the folder and I say go from 0 to 150 and I say capture the movie, save selected. So, and that you can see this live. Now everything is assigned. There's the retracing assigned. There is the compositing. I mean, the color grading assigned, the motion blur, the depth of field, the bokeh effects, chromatic aberration, all this kind of stuff, and boom, done. So, and that animation was rendered. How long did it take now? In even bigger than full HD, but that was really quick. So if I go to my where is it? Unreal projects, and you have my city, and content, render output. No, I didn't save it here, but I want to show you. I want to prove it to you. So if I go here to my render output folder and bring it into a player, in a live player, I'm also using the DGV viewer. I think that's really cool. RAM player. So you see it here now live. Look, that's it. I mean, this is of course with low settings. That means for the final renders, I change the samples in the ray tracer, so then you don't see that flickering, okay? But for my first Previz and for my first preview, I basically go always like that. And, you know, render time is increasing a little bit, of course, that's for sure if you increase the samples. But for this particular case, there is no more need and it doesn't bother me. It's a training anyways. So that's about it. I hope you liked it and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope this was helpful for you. And I would say if you didn't have a chance yet to download that project file, do it now. Go to my website fedibull.com to the resource section and download it. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to connect with me. I'm everywhere. I'm on Discord, and you can chat with me and leave a nice comment on my website or on my YouTube videos. And if you have any other questions or if you would like to know anything else, then yeah, I would say just reach out to me, because I love what I do and I believe in sharing and giving. And I hope you have fun too out there creating your artwork, getting better in your cinematic approach in rendering, shading, lighting, whatever you do. It's just a big passion of mine, and you know, as you might know, it's also my profession since the last 10 years. I've been working for some major studios here in the US. But anyways, I hope you liked it. Thank you so much for watching. I wish you all the best and talk to you soon. Till my next video. Again, this is Bernhard, aka fedibull.com. Thanks for watching and talk to you later. Take care. Bye bye.